This is the Lobster Butternut Squash Risotto from Hell's Kitchen. That's Gordon Ramsay's food competition show, not MasterChef, but the other one. We're going to use some arboreal rice here. That's the main risotto rice used. There's a few other ones, but this is the easiest to find. We have some mise en place here, which is very important because this dish comes together fast, so I've prepped ahead. We have some blanched pieces of butternut squash. We have some chopped up chives, and then we have shallot also. And we also have a butternut squash puree, which I'm going to show you how to make here in a second. That is the main ingredient for the butternut squash part, but then we have 2 lobster tails, one for each. This is an appetizer on the TV show, but I'm going to make it as an entree tonight, so I'm doing 2 portions. Need a little bit of white wine also, but here's how we make the butternut squash. We're going to cut it in half. The top part of the butternut squash does not have seeds, so I like to separate that ahead of time. Once you pop the bottom part open, pop out those seeds. Very similar to deseeding a pumpkin. It feels the same. They're all squashes, so just get that out. Make sure you get as much of the lining out too, because that part just doesn't taste great to me. Try to get as much of it out as you can. Repeat it for both of the halves, and then cut that top part in half. As you can see, it's seedless. I'm going to save half of that. That's what those diced pieces came from earlier in the mise en place you saw. And then we're going to bake the rest of these at 350 degrees Fahrenheit. I like to coat them in a little bit of olive oil just to help them not stick and to cook a little bit, but pop that in 350. Right around 45 minutes is what it's going to take. Pull them out when you notice that they're kind of shrinking up like this, and you could poke it with a fork. As you can see, I had tested that already, but that's exactly what you're looking for. I like to let them then cool down for a few minutes just so they're easier to handle. The skin, you could push them through like any sort of like metal grate if you have it, but I find it easier to just get in there with a spoon, pull out all the insides. That's why I like to wait till they cool down. Get as much as you can. Even the burnt bits taste good. We're going to add a little bit of cream. I'm going to use my hand blender here, but you could use a regular blender if you want. If the cream doesn't get it to the consistency you want, I'm going to add a splash of whole milk. Once that gets exactly where you want it, you're basically good to go. I'm going to add a little bit of butter. We're not going to season this, though. I'm going to add this to the risotto at the end, so we will be seasoning the risotto. If you're using this in a dish as a actual like plating item, make sure you then season it. But I'm going to be using a nice high-walled pan here because the risotto flies everywhere. We got some butter in the back there for the lobster tails, and then we got a chicken stock just warm because you're going to add that to the risotto, so you want it warm. I'm going to kind of thinly coat the oil. That way when I pour the rice in there now, I can start to toast it off. That is 2 cups of rice, about a cup per person. It turned out to be way too much. So if you're making this for 2 people, maybe half a cup, 3/4 of a cup per person. But as you can see now, the color has started to change as they're toasting a little bit. So I'm going to throw in those shallots. Immediately, you could hear them start to sweat out. That's what you're looking for. Let that go for 2 or 3 minutes till they start to really kind of sweat out. They're going to continue to cook with the stock, so it's totally fine. But then we're going to add about 1/8 to 1/4 of a cup of white wine here. And you're going to cook that out. Make sure you get all the wine alcohol out of it. You do not want alcohol taste. Once you add the stock, if the alcohol taste is there, it's going to stay there. So make sure you cook that out now. Once that's nice and cooked out, we're going to start just ladling the hot stock in. It's just simmering at this point. Don't really have it boiling, but right below a boil is where you want it. And just keep that moving. We're going to add about a ladle full every 1 to 2 minutes for about 20 to 25 minutes until this rice is fully cooked. You want to just move it around constantly. Do not stop really at any point, otherwise it will stick to the bottom, it will burn, it won't cook evenly. But just as you can see here, we're just going to keep on moving this around. It's exactly what you're looking for. You can see right away the starch starts to come out and really starts to help thicken it up. You will see that more and more as you cook it. But every minute, 2 minutes, that's what you're going to do. Here we are about 10 minutes in. I'm going to throw those lobster tails in the butter now to start reheating them. They are fully cooked, or they were just short of fully cooked. You could buy any types of lobster tail you want here. You could buy raw. You could buy fully cooked. Just make sure you try to time it out, so by the time your risotto's done, they are up to temperature. This is probably about 15 minutes in. We're still mixing it. You can see it's really started to bloom. The starch has come out nicely. It's not too watery, which is exactly what you're looking for. You're not trying to boil them. The lobsters here are now perfect. You can see that butter is really coating them all beautifully. This is right about where we want. At this point, I'm tasting it to make sure everything's fine. It's a little bit short of al dente, so I'm going to add in the butternut squash puree. Not adding a specific amount here. I'm looking for color, so the taste itself is pretty mild. So no matter how much you add, it's not going to overpower the flavor. I'm just going for that kind of nice orange look that I'm used to seeing from the TV show, and I've had it in person at Gordon's restaurant. So I'm looking for that color. Right around here is right what we're looking for, and now we're going to season it. Season it fairly liberally. We also are going to add Parmesan cheese, which will add a little bit of flavor and salt as well. And we're going to add a little bit of pepper. I'm going to add white pepper just so you don't see brown specks, but you don't need to do that. You can add in your pepper any way you'd like. Make sure you mix that. Continue to taste during this process also. You want to make sure everything is right where you want it. I'm going to add a little bit of those chives at this point just to start to cook them in and to get their flavor out. It's very subtle, but I do kind of like that cooked chive flavor. You don't need to do that either. And then we are also going to add in the blanched butternut squash pieces. These are basically fully cooked, so the point now is just to bring them up to temperature. You don't want to throw them in raw, but I just blanched those in boiling water for 2 or 3 minutes earlier in the day just to have it all ready. If you notice it getting a little too thick, throw in some more splashes of the stock like I did there. You really can't screw that up. If it's too loose, that's not great, but if it's too thick, you can work with that. Taste it. These are just about where I want them. So we're going to add in a tablespoon of butter, a little more stock to help bring that together. It was getting a little bit thick. And now we're also going to throw in some Parmesan cheese. You can add in as much cheese as you want. I'm going to add a good amount here on camera, but then I'm going to add a little more off camera. The cheese will help bring it all together. It'll give it a really nice consistency. It'll even get a little bit of shine from the fat and the cheese and the butter. So it's a very useful part here. Some people add cream, but there's no need for that. The butter and the cheese will do all of that fat emulsification that you're looking for, and you're basically ready to serve it at this point. Taste it, make sure it's not too al dente. If it's a little too hard, throw in a little more stock and you'd be good to go. I'm going to just plate this up nice. So I'm going to cut these lobster tails into some nice bite-sized pieces. That way you don't really need a knife when you're eating this. You can just use a fork. That's how the restaurants I've been at have done it, and it just makes it a little easier to consume. But once you chop that up, move that to the side, and now we're going to plate this up. I'm going for real fancy plating here, trying to keep this as true to, Gordon and Hell's Kitchen as possible. You don't need to do this. Throw it into a bowl and enjoy it, but we're going to have a little bit of fun with this right now. Try to not drop it all over your cutting board first, though, but throw that onto the nicest plate you have. The little trick I'm going to show you here is to get it to kind of space out like a nice plate in a restaurant. You want to give it a little shake and a little tap down, and that will give it a nice even spread like that. It'll make it a nice kind of circle like that. That's what the restaurants do, rather than just pouring it onto a plate. Throw that lobster tail over the top. I'm going to also come in and add a little bit of that butter that I poached them in, just to give it a little bit of that nice nutty taste, because that is like kind of nice brown butter at this point. Not a ton of it, just a little bit over the top. And we're also going to come in and sprinkle those chives over. This is just a garnish, but the chives do taste fairly nice. If you don't like that, you can omit it. The restaurants I've been to also add a nice little fried sage leaf onto the dish. I couldn't find any of those in my store, but that's it. That's the dish. It's absolutely stunning to look at, but it tastes just as good. The butternut squash flavor is really nice with this risotto. The lobster is a nice little addition. It's cheesy. It's rich. This is a fantastic appetizer and an even better entree.